Dr. Usman Chohan is an analyst and expert on foreign policy and regional politics. Welcome to the show, Dr. Chohan. But before that, Dr. Chohan, talking about the key concerns that President Erdogan talked about. I think he touched all the right notes when he was talking about Pakistan, Pakistan's national security for that matter. How do you see those points? Qatar for that matter. This is very timely, by the way. And also Kashmir. How do you see it?
Above all, I think that the support that Turkey has articulated for the FATF is important because as we enter the plenary in the next few days, which will last from the 16th till the 21st in Paris, we will be looking for our allies and our partners to be articulating the case for us making so much progress. The way the FATF works, it is consensus building and negotiation, and what they will be looking at is all of the progress we have made on all of the fronts. It's a very difficult process through which we articulate these problems. The fact that Turkey has said openly, Erdogan's speech has explicitly said it, is a strength that we are able to engage with the world on a difficult question of financial regulation and accountability at such a timely position. And the second point is about Kashmir. Erdogan compared the battle for the Kashmiris and their plight to be the same as Gallipoli in 1915. So this is very important because he said that we see this plight of those Kashmiris as our own. So it is not just to take it as an external reviewer of a world issue, but to subsume it under one's own concerns.
Right.
That sort of alignment in worldviews, and to say it to our parliament in that manner, is a very important step as far as we negate the efforts of India to isolate us. If they say that they have attempted to isolate us, and yet world leaders come to tell us that our pain is their pain, means that we have thwarted those attempts by India.
Right. And Dr. Chohan, we obviously need more world leaders to talk about Kashmir. And Kashmir is a concern, I would say, not just for Pakistan or the people of Kashmir. It's a concern for anybody who cares about violation of human rights anywhere in the world, for that matter. As I said, there are few leaders like Erdogan who would talk about Kashmir. How do you see his statement? What are the, let's say, aspirations, or where do they get this confidence from when they talk about Kashmir? Because, as I said, there are not much leaders like that. But what makes Erdogan different from other world leaders? Or Turkey as a nation, their national character? How do you see it?
I think that one credit we must always give to Turkey, but particularly in the last 20 years, is that they have adopted a very long-term orientation towards their civilization and towards the world. I can evidence that with several examples. Turkish Airlines has the most routes of any airline in the world, even unprofitable ones. Why? Because they anticipate the growth of these countries and they want to be the centerpiece for the movement of those people around the world. Similarly, they send their doctors to places that are very remote and people are struggling, so that people then, when they rise, recognize that Turkey contributed to that rise. That means sending doctors to Rwanda and Kenya and that sort of thing. So Turkey has adopted a long-term orientation towards policies, and as part of that, they have been able to gain a lot of goodwill and political capital. So other countries then recognize Turkish leadership and eminence in difficult issues. Somebody with a stake that will last much longer. That is particularly true for the Middle East. And Erdogan, in his own speech in our parliament, said that Turkey has taken the leadership role in resolving the problems of Libya, Syria, and Yemen, and Iraq. And the fact,
by the way, very vocal on Palestine for that.
And
that case with Israel and all that.
Absolutely, in the dispute between Israel and Palestine and the Kashmir dispute as well, they are mentioning that they're doing things and then they're evidencing it with actual measures. Even if it puts them at short-term losses economically, their strategy is to reap the dividends over time. And that is part of Erdogan's vision, that's part of Turkey's vision, and that is also part of their national character. Obviously, it was a very large empire, and many of the areas that they are handling now were part of the Ottoman legacy. Maybe some revisionism, some irredentism is a part of that, but I think that it's the fact that they have a horizon that is different from other countries, that they can accomplish goals and gather other countries along with them.
And Dr. Chohan, how would you evaluate the pressure that is being exerted, I would say, on India regarding Kashmir? China, United States now, 4 senators, at least they have written this letter. Malaysia is talking about Kashmir, Turkey is talking about Kashmir. So countries are talking about Kashmir and the plight of the Kashmiris over there. How important is this pressure that we need to build on India diplomatically, and how would you evaluate our foreign policy, let's say, or Kashmir on the foreign policy front?
I think that the efforts that we have made towards pressurizing India based solely on the moral dictum of the right to self-determination has been very powerful, and it has resonated across the world. The United Nations, all of the countries that you mentioned, the press, as AVM Saab mentioned, the media, all these institutions, out of their own moral compass, regard the fact that the international system's sense of overall stability and morality is being challenged by these unilateral actions. Kashmir is a disputed territory. That is its official status. To annex it in the manner that India did is almost criminal. And there is a legal case to be fought. There's the lawfare arena. There's the economic warfare arena. But there is the narrative building aspect. And in that, Pakistan has, by exercising the restraint and challenging the conscience of the world, patiently day after day that this curfew has taken place, left a mark that India is having to jump through mental gymnastics to justify why it would do this sort of thing. Ultimately, the kinds of excuses and pretenses that India offers that it would try to develop this region or do this basically goes back to the same sort of rule that you saw pre-partition, pre-independence in Kashmir, where the Dogras and those sorts of Hindu minions of the Dogra had all of the capital and the Muslims were the labor, and the Marxist exploitation of those Kashmiris was perpetuated all the time. That is what India is offering again. It will be the minority of Hindu capital, and these Kashmiris will be forced to labor under them in the best of circumstances. Either they're shut in their homes or they will be exploited as labor, and that's all the options they're given. That's what Pakistan is articulating to the world, that this is a moral crisis to step up to.
And very rightly mentioned RSS and the nexus with BJP. Dr. Chohan, this is unprecedented that a Pakistani Prime Minister would rather expose RSS specifically and its nexus with BJP, Shiv Sena for that matter, at UNGA, United Nations General Assembly. That has not been happening before. But the way Prime Minister Imran Khan has been talking about it now, even on tweets for that matter, on Twitter, on social media, otherwise, exposing RSS, that mindset, and letting the Western mind know about RSS by analogy of Nazi forces, let's say, or the Nazi party. How do you see that? How important is that, by the way?
It is extremely important, because when you want to make the argument to a generalist audience, which is not related by ethnicity or by regionality to us, they want to first understand the logic by which India's party is operating. That logic has been enshrined in the writings and the speeches of RSS leaders back to the 1920s. And the RSS started off with many conflicts inside, deciding what role it had to play, but over time it has become very monstrous. And many Indians have a hard time being able to justify their tacit support for this organization and how its roots and tentacles have spread across the Indian polity. The most important way that Indians who appear to be centrist is that they said, well, Modi's party is very good for the economy and he's a very sensible businessman type guy. That is the last farce that is being torn now, because the Indian economy is in shambles.
And by the way, he wanted to show that while he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, and he let loose, hell on Muslims over there, and that is basically his qualification to become a Prime Minister now.
Precisely. The pogroms that happened in Gujarat in the early 2000s were also sidelined because they said, well, Gujarat is developing, so let's focus on the money here. In a capitalist world system, people always talk money first and the morality goes down the drain. But even the economy going down the drain weakens the arguments that these sympathizers, these fascist sympathizers would have. Basically, that's because they have been lying about their economy for too long. It's been about 8 years that they have been exaggerating the growth statistics. That's because India is a large economy, so it's hard to really measure what's going on. So they have been deceiving their own people and foreign investors. Foreign investors have very little tolerance for this stuff. That's why money is running out the door in India. But the fact that there are runs on the bank and that banks are starting to collapse, there's a credit crisis and consumption is going down and inflation is going up, is making it very hard to justify why such a fascist would be in power at all.
Right. We're going to continue our discussion. And the next topic would be Afghanistan. There are talks that there might be a ceasefire deal between the Taliban and the United States. Primarily, that's so very interesting what they're talking about, Dr. Chohan, and that is many people speculate that there at the moment Americans are talking about troops withdrawal, obviously, in different phases, but there are reports that they would still keep intelligence presence in Afghanistan. Would that be acceptable to Afghanistan? Would they like to be, let's say, like that policing, American policing in Afghanistan, keeping an eye and check on Taliban for that matter? How do you see this? Is this a political need of the Trump administration at the moment? We see, these election years here, and they want to expedite the peace process. Now, you cannot impose peace talks on Taliban. How do you see that?
Absolutely. There's been some recent talk in Foreign Policy and other magazines that are American and centered towards the left, is that there might be a lot of training happening by U.S. interests to create a kind of police state in Afghanistan, using the intelligence services that they've cultivated to persecute people. Basically, the opposite of the democratic values that the U.S. has. Afghanistan, basically the opposite is happening now, with the kind of cultivation of a police state, a client state, the sort of arrangement that it has had in Central America in the past. And to imagine that that would be the kind of model they wish to have in Afghanistan is so removed from the previous examples that they had set in the mid-20th century with the Marshall Plan and all that, of reconstructing societies. What has happened instead this time is that it is whatever they have claimed will be the success, the opposite has turned out. And because it is the opposite of the values that they have, they're going to have to go through gymnastics of rhetoric and gymnastics in the mental manner, particularly in Congress, particularly in the State Department, and arguing that if we want to have this presence, what is the degree of control that we'll exercise, and what sort of funneling of investments and funneling of appropriations from Congress could happen for that sort of thing. So it's a very difficult conversation that's happening in Washington itself to be able to have some presence in Afghanistan that is palatable to the locals as well as to America.
Right. Dr. Chohan, options for Pakistan, because we are directly and indirectly affected by what has happened in Afghanistan in the last 19 years, even before that, by the way. Peace deal in Afghanistan, Pakistan, by the way, on many occasions has been facilitating these talks. Taliban were here in Islamabad. They went to the Foreign Office and received by a foreign minister. They have been visiting China, Iran, Russia, for that matter, Qatar. So what are the options for Pakistan in terms of its foreign policy and its security?
I believe that Pakistan's consensus is that we need a stable, responsible neighbor. The question, of course, is who will be managing Afghanistan and who will be stepping in to manage on behalf of the manager. So who watches the watchman? And when it comes to that, we have a natural interest in Afghanistan based on the geography, the contiguous border, the question of an ethnicity here and there, the fact that we host and have hosted for about 40 years 2.4 million is the number now. It was up to 4 once upon a time. Antonio Guterres of the United Nations is arriving here to discuss the plight and to raise the world conscience on how difficult it is for a country that is already so resource constrained as us to host another country which has collapsed and is not showing the right signs of developing. That is an immense burden. And we took it because of a principled stance to support a neighbor in need. We've paid a very heavy price socially for that, economically for that. And now our ultimate goal is to find a stable neighbor. It's really up to that. The options, whatever the peace deal is, we have articulated our sincere commitment to it. We have been facilitating things, but it is up to the Afghan people to determine their life. It's up to and their way forward. Our job is mainly to support them in that direction.
Right. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.